Okay, so welcome. We're going to be talking about cost of delay today. I've got a little bit of different setup without being on front of the slides because I'm going to do some stuff on the blackboard here. Cost of delay. Just want to mention I have a Starting Agile book. You can find that pretty easy. Email me if you want a digital copy of it. I'd be happy to send it to you or point you to where you can get it. There's a URL for my YouTube channel. Got videos coming out on there. I've got some other ones should be coming out pretty soon, but I'm learning about how YouTube handles licensed music, which I haven't dealt with that before. Okay, here's what's coming up. We've got the cost of delay today on the 28th. We've got bringing agility to shared services. On the 5th of next month, we're going to be looking at Agile Principle number 4. And then looking out a ways, we've got Dominica DeGrandis coming in a few months and Julia Wester coming in a few months. So we're still working out the titles on them, but they've agreed to come on those days. So hopefully those all come together. Looking forward to that. Let's see. Stella's waiting. Why isn't... Okay. Okay, if anyone knows somebody named Stella, she's in the room for next week, and you can let her know. Okay, I do see there's a hand up. Did you have a question about something, or was that from when I said give a thumbs up? Is everybody having audio now? Got audio? Okay, cool. Okay, got some more people coming. Let me paste this in here. We've got some questions we'll be asking as we go. So, first question I want to ask is, how do you prioritize your work? These are all legitimate ways, well, all ways that people prioritize their work. What do you as your team do? Do you prioritize work based on the return on investment? Is it based on the cost of delay? Is it WYTL, whoever yells the loudest? Or is it seniority wins? And it looks like we've got about half people saying return on investment. So go ahead and fill that out for just a second. Very good. Okay. This is these are unusually high numbers for return on investment. Usually I see those as being lower, and seniority and whoever yells the loudest is a lot higher. And cost of delay and return on investment can be similar things, and we'll be looking at that as we go. Okay, so next question here. Does your prioritization yield significantly better economic results than randomly choosing the next story to work on? So yes, no, we don't know, or depends on how you define significantly and economic results. So does your prioritization yield significantly better economic results than randomly choosing the next story to work on? And this is actually a good question to ask sometimes. Like, what story do we work on? Well, we don't know. Well, let's just randomly choose them, or let's go through them in alphabetical order. And that should generate a discussion about, well, how would we actually prioritize a story? What is the best way to decide what to work on next? So that's what we're going to be looking at some here today. Okay, it looks like 70% are saying yes. Most of us are kind of in the camp of saying we're not really sure. So that may mean maybe we are, maybe we aren't. And then we've got 40% of us saying it depends on the definitions. Okay, so choosing to do X means not choosing to do Y and Z. And this is really important because this often gets left out. Oftentimes we think of what we want to do, but we don't think of what we're choosing not to do instead of that. If you decide to stay up and watch Netflix all night, you are choosing not to sleep. What's the value of the sleep that you're giving up? And if you don't understand what the value is of that, you can really prioritize things wrong and assume you're much better off staying up and watching Netflix because you get to see the next show that's got the cliffhanger. But the cost of what you're delaying or cost of what you're foregoing is probably where the real cost occurs. The value of completing X versus the value of, or the cost of not completing Y and Z. So this brings us into, I mean, what we're doing here is this is the type of thinking we need to have, be doing in order to understand what the cost of delay is and how to think about it. If we prioritize poorly, it will produce dramatically worse results. Like the example of Netflix. If you prioritize poorly and value watching Netflix shows for 8 hours when you should be sleeping, you will have dramatically worse results the next day when you show up at work. So it makes a really, really big difference. But if you just look at what you're choosing to do, you'll miss the thing that you're choosing not to do, and it's easy to overlook the actual cost involved in what you're doing. Next week, we're going to be talking about shared services, and that's even a bigger deal in shared services because it's really easy to prioritize things based on just the way it looks for the shared service department or whatever that unit of the organization is, while pushing the expense out to all the different parts of the organization. So we're going to look at two areas here, the cost of delay in story selection and then the cost of delay in capacity planning. So let's start with the story selection. So here we have 4 stories. We have story A, B, C, and D. And each of these has a duration, how long it will take us to actually deliver it, and then a cost of delay. So some type of metric, and there's different ways to calculate this. SAFe has some ways of doing this, but some type of metric that lets us compare what the cost is of waiting on these things. Like how much is it going to cost us not to do one of these things? That's the cost of delay. So weighted shortest job first says that we take the cost of delay, so the story A, take that 10 and divide it by 1, and that gives us 10. So that gives us a weight for story A of 10 because story A has a very high cost of delay, but the duration, how long it will take to deliver it, is really, really short. So story B, on the other hand, has a duration, it will take 3 units of time to deliver it, but the cost of delay is only 5. So that gets a weight of 1.6. Story C has a duration of 5 and a cost of delay of 3. So if we divide 3 by 5, then we get 0.6. Story D, on the other hand, has a low cost of delay. It's only 1. But the duration, it takes 10 units of time compared to story A, which takes 1 unit of time. So the weight on that is 0.1. Now, the value of this, I was sitting in a Safe for Leaders class one time, and we had very, very long days, and we're starting to go through weighted shortest job first here like this. And one of the managers just looks at me like, I can't believe the amount of math just to decide what's going on next here. Mainly because we were all very, very tired out. The advantage of doing this, though, isn't necessarily that you get the number here and you use the weight or however it is, but this can be a very useful way for having conversations when you're not sure what to do next. Now, you may be able to determine just what the next best thing is to do without necessarily having to do all these calculations. What's the shortest thing we can do that gives us the most benefit? That may be it. But if particularly if you're needing to negotiate with a large number of people about what gets done and what doesn't, and you've got a really big backlog, weighted shortest job first can be a good way to have those conversations. Now, there's some stuff, and I'll try to remember to send out a link to this. There's some stuff that Troy McGinnis did where he looked at a bunch of these different ways of prioritizing it. And as part of that, they proved mathematically that weighted shortest job first is not necessarily or not always the optimal choice from an economic standpoint. But rarely do we need to worry about making the absolute mathematical best economic choice. Usually we just have to make sure we're not making bad choices and we're light years ahead of people that are making bad choices. So I wouldn't let that deter you from necessarily using this if it works well within your political environment and who you're working with, to go ahead and have conversations and determine what to work on next. The goal here isn't necessarily to be 100% confident that you have the absolute best thing to work on if it takes a really, really long time for you to decide. The goal is to make sure that you're not prioritizing really low priority work over high priority work. And if most of the time you're getting high priority work, you're doing well. And if you think of it this way, the amount of effort that goes into figuring out, let's say you want to go from Kansas City to Chicago, and you're not going to take the highway. You're going to take all back roads because for some reason. And you're wanting to calculate the optimal route without being on any major interstates, we'll say. The amount of calculation necessary to make sure and prove that it's the optimal route is very, very, very high. The amount of calculation necessary in a GPS or something just to prove it's a good route is very, very low. And probably the amount of effort you would spend on proving it is a perfectly best route possible is greater than the effort of just driving a good route to get there. So the reason I want to bring that up, and hopefully that makes sense, is that weighted shortest job first is a decent way of making sure that you're not overlooking the cost of delay in things. It may not be optimal. There are other ways to do it. There are simpler ways to do it and stuff, but this can be a good way that you can get people together to talk about what you're going to deliver next when you have constrained resources delivering things that are valuable to people. So here's an example. You've heard me use the example of Basecamp before about how they delayed building their credit card processing until they got to a point that they actually had new people were going to use the software and were ready to pay them. So I want to go through the math behind some of those decisions. So they had, if I remember the numbers right, they had a 90-day trial. You could use the product for 90 days, didn't require a credit card to sign up. After 90 days, they would start charging you $15 a month. So if we look at a chart here, so what is the cost of delay of billing functionality? So on this chart, here we go. So let's say they start January 1st and they get 10 total customers. So what's the cost of delay of billing for that first month in January? So go ahead and throw that. I've got where I can see the chat. Throw some ideas. What's the cost of delay of billing for the month of January? Remember, 90 days, it's free. They just started up. They've got 10 customers. After the 90-day mark, they start billing people $15 a month. Okay, so very good. Yes, it's zero, right? The cost of delay right now is zero. There is no benefit of having a billing system in January because there is absolutely not a single person on the planet that's going to pay anything for this. So we've got zero. Okay, in February, they've got 100 customers. What is the cost of delay in February? Yes, it's zero again, right? Still within 90 days. We get to March, same thing. We've got zero in March. Okay, now we get to April. They've got 10,000 customers by the time we get to April. They are going to, so they're growing very, very well. Lots of people really like their software. What is the cost of delay if they decide not to implement billing in April? Got some different answers here, okay? So yes, so the 10 times 15, because the cost of the delay is those 10 people are the one from January, if they're still around. Now, if they've dropped off and other people have replaced them, then maybe it's lower, but the cost of delay is $150 of actually delaying that in January. And the reason I want to point, and then on the next month, in May, let's say they're still at 10,000 people. In May, it's the 15 times 100 because that's how many people there were in February. That's how many people were at the 90-day mark. And the reason I like this example is I think it helps give you some idea of some of the things that need to kind of go into thinking through the cost of delay. Now, you may not work in an area where you're tied directly to, we've got customers and they're going to start paying at this point and different things like that. But if they got to April, they would be making a decision between billing. They could, they could easily give it away for free to everybody. Say, hey, we gave you 1 extra month free to all their early adopters, to those 10 people. And that might be a very rational thing to do if there's other work they could do that was worth more than $150 to them. So if they had to choose between doing the $150, getting the $150 by billing, or there's something of the same size they could do that would produce $1,000, they might be very willing to forego that $150 in April. Now, when you get to May, the cost of delay is higher, so they may not be willing to forego it for the same amount then. Okay, so hopefully that's a useful way to kind of think of what cost of delay could look like. So, cost of delay in story prioritization. So let's look, let me switch over here. Okay, can you guys see the blackboard okay? Does that show up? Should say cost of delay right up there. Thumbs up. Yes, okay. So let's look at some other examples here. If we have, make sure I choose good colors. Okay. So let's say we've got this. We've got the cost of delay. The cost. This is time. Sure, do it the way it was planned. Okay, so this is, matter of fact, let's just call this value. Okay, let's make sure I'm not staying in front. Okay, so we got value like that, and we've got time going like this. So let's say we've got 3 stories we want to do. And one of these stories looks like this. Let's see, how do we want to do this? Actually, I'm going to do it the other way. We've got one story that looks like this. Okay, so it's, let's say 3 units of time and 1 unit of value. And so we're going to deliver that story, and then we have another story here that looks like this. And it will be, we'll call that 2 units of time, 2 units of value. And then we've got another story here that looks like Yeah, we went higher than I wanted, but okay. So we've got something that looks like that. So this story is going to take us this many units of time across, right, to give us this amount of value. And then once we get to here, it will earn that amount of value every time going forward. This one here gives us more value and in less time, like that. And this story here gives us a lot of value and only one in 1 unit of time. So if we think of the graph like this, here is the generated value. So here's where we're generating value, right? So this is earning the return on investment is over here. So that's the ROI. So once these things are done, they start generating value. On the other hand, if we look at this graph, the other piece of it here, all this is the cost of delay. This is the time you spent waiting. And actually, we should probably say it includes even while we're trying to deliver stuff. So there's the cost of delay right there. So once we deliver a story, it starts earning value. Here's the cost that we're spending waiting to get those stories. Now, that isn't necessarily bad, right? We have to go ahead and build the stories at some point, and we have to build one thing before another. So that doesn't mean that's bad that we have some cost of delay here. It's not like you can get rid of cost of delay entirely. But let me show you what happens if we do it like this. We take this, there's going to be our value again. And then this is our time. Now what happens if we look at this and we start doing something like the latest shortest job first, right? If we look at this and we say, okay, what's the most valuable thing that takes the least amount of time? Well, maybe I want to deliver this story first. So what happens if I do that? If I deliver this story first, it's something like this. These are not to scale, by the way. Okay, so I'm going to deliver that first. And what's the next thing that gives me the most value in the least amount of time? Well, maybe this square right here, the one that was 2 units of time and 2 units of value. So maybe I deliver that one next, like that. And then this other thing that doesn't have as high a value will take a while, but it's still important to us. So we're going to go ahead and deliver that, like this. Okay, so now, looking over there at that, I've now got a very different thing here. So if I start shading in my ROI here, there is, I should have done them more to scale, but there is a lot more shaded area here if these are all like 3 units and 2 units and 3 units here. There's a lot more area here than there's going to be over here. And look at this cost of delay now. See how much smaller that is? Just by doing the stories in a different order. So this is the type of thing that you want to be thinking about when you're trying to prioritize your work. We're delivering the exact same thing. And actually the cost of delay should go through these stories as well, because that's how I did it over here. So we'll call that as part of delivering the story. You could do it either way, I guess. But there's a significant difference in the way that we've ordered these things. For some companies, this might be the difference between going bankrupt and actually having enough money to make payroll every week. So the purpose of things like weighted shortest job first and things like that is to make sure that you don't do this inadvertently because this story was somebody was yelling really loud about this particular story, or we really, really wanted this story even though we don't really have justification for it. And make sure you're tending toward making more decisions that look like this. So it can have a very, very big impact in what you're able to deliver. So here is, okay, so does that make, let me check the chat. Did that make sense? Okay, cool. So the most impactful values that matter. Yes, if you need to think not only in terms of how valuable this is, not only in terms of how senior the position the person that wants it is, but also how long it's going to take to deliver that, and what are you deferring by delivering it, right? If I build this, if I build other things before, I mean, this story right here has really, really high value and takes very little time to deliver. It might be a very mundane thing that you're delivering. It might not be exciting at all. There may be no one on the senior management team that's excited about this story. But if you think in terms of the financial impact of it, this may be what you should do first because it has such a huge value and takes very little time to deliver. And if we wait to deliver that, like over here, we deliver that first, but if we wait to deliver that, there's all this space here that's the cost of delaying that. And the space here is going to be much higher than these ones down here, like this one, that takes a long time to deliver, but doesn't produce much value. Okay, so let me, I've got a cloth here somewhere. Okay, so does that make sense? And I'd encourage you to write this out for yourself, because I saw this at a conference one time, and I think it comes from, actually let me show you the book. This book has lots of principles of product flow. This has lots of really, really good graphs like this of thinking through these types of things. So I highly recommend this book. And this type of approach is something that I saw in there. I don't think it's the only way necessarily to do it. Okay, so hopefully that's useful. Here, I'll wait for just a second in case you want a screenshot of it. But the other thing I'd encourage you to do is go ahead and draw this out sometime, particularly if you can do it on graph paper. Because I know when I saw it presented, I was like, oh, that's cool. But then when I went and actually did it, I was like, oh, this is something I really need to pay more attention to, because these are very, very different in the results we get. Okay, I'm going to erase it now, and let's look at something else. Wait a second, this stuff dries on here pretty fast. Okay, so we looked at these stories as entire, like big units, right? The entire thing. You had to do all or nothing on every single one of these stories. But is that always necessarily true? And I would suggest it's not. And if you can get better at splitting stories, you can get a whole lot more value out of what you're delivering. So if we think here of, okay, so let's say we've got a story that somebody wants. It looks like this. And this story right here that we're being asked for is very high value. High value. It's very, very important. But it's going to take a while to do, right? It's a big story that people are asking for. But if we're able to split this story, we may be able to do something like this. So here's let's use an example that I usually like for this. So let's say this is and this is a real example from somebody I was working with. Some of you may be even on this call. They needed a notification system on their website, on their intranet site. So it's very high value, very important. They could kind of see COVID stuff was coming up. They wanted a good way to be able to put notifications there. So they had this very well written out, everything that they wanted. But when we started really looking at it, we broke that up. And we discovered that the piece that was the highest value to them was this basic notification. So just the ability to get one message at the top of the website. And then above that in value was not quite as important, was having multiple, was this piece of it. Was being able to have multiple types of notifications. Tell my kids to watch their handwriting, I need to watch mine. So different types of notifications. And then above that, in things that was in the list of what they wanted, was a piece here of having scheduling. So when we broke these things down and took the story that was high value here and broke it down, we were able to break it down in pieces and say, okay, this is what's most important. And if we break these things up, we can deliver this first. And then these other things we can schedule based on whatever is most important next. Maybe this is the next most important thing to work on, but maybe there's something else in the backlog that's even more important. So that's what we did with this team, and they got their basic notification up, I think, in just a few days. And the rest of this stuff, at least last time I talked to them, was still on the backlog because there were other things that were more important if they could deliver them quickly. So the point of this is that graph I just showed you where we are breaking stuff, where we are doing things in different orders. Sometimes those things can be broken down into ways that let you get the piece that gives you most value, maybe the piece that takes the least amount of time or a smaller amount of time. And so if you approach it like that, you can get a huge amount of, you can really change what your return on investment is by focusing on these pieces that are really, really high value and deferring some stuff to later. The cost of delay for them of having the scheduling was very, very low the cost of not having basic notification was very, very high. And matter of fact, this was so low that as far as I know, they still haven't built that. There are also, let's see. Okay, so there are also a lot of different ways. I'm going to, well, here, I'll do it here. Actually, I'll share these. Okay, so not everything has the exact same graph for cost of delay. So there are some things that are just linear, right? Every unit of time, you have the same cost of delay, same amount of cost is incurred. There are other things that are like this, right? It doesn't cost you anything until it costs you everything. So what's the cost of, what would be an example of this? Not wearing your seatbelt, right? Well, it doesn't cost you anything until you get into a wreck, and then if you die, that's very, very high cost. Other things have costs that look like something like this. Doing things that promote poor health might be something like this, right? It gets worse and worse and worse. Technical debt that you just let go and have no plan for dealing with, and it just gets to where it slows you down more and more and more. There are also things that are shaped more like this, to where as time goes by, it's not as expensive anymore. The cost of delaying it kind of even levels off and goes away. And so if you're dealing with something that's actually got a curve like this to where it levels off, you may decide there are other things that have cost of delay that's more valuable for you to work on than the thing that's curved like this. Just check the chats real here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, cool. There's also cost of delay that looks something like this. So just for fun, throw something in, doesn't have to be related to work or even programming, but is there anything in your life that looks like it has that might have a cost of delay that's stair-stepped like this? Like it costs you something, and then you go for a while and it doesn't cost you anything, and it costs you something again. So throw that in the chat. Any idea? Taxes. Well, not paying the taxes might, I'm not sure what happens if you don't pay the tax. So a penalty, raising children, okay. Oh, these are great. I need to like ask for these and take these and work these into my talk instead. So one that comes to mind is pretty much anything that's some type of subscription service or some type of penalty, right? If imagine you're at a homeowners association and they do not like the color of your house. Your house is green and they say it has to be blue. And every month they fine you $200 on the first day of the month if your house is green instead of blue. Well, in this case, you go along and time goes along and you get the first fine, right? You've had the fine. Well, then you've got $200, cost you $200. Well, now as you go, there's nothing that happens. There is no expense that you incur until you get to the next month, and then you take that next step up. Now, the fact that you can go a month without incurring the fee and then you get it all at once probably shouldn't convince you that you can just ignore it, but that it may determine how you prioritize that with other things. If you have something else that's about to incur a fee, maybe you pay for that before you pay for your house to be repainted, or you move to another neighborhood where you paint your house whatever color you want. Subscription fees, like if you're subscribed to something and every month they bill you on the first of the month, and you can cancel, but if you don't cancel, you get billed on the next month. Well, once you paid that fee, you probably aren't, depending on how it's set up, but maybe you don't get anything back if you cancel. So you're paid for that month anyway, but then you're going to hit it again. Anyway, the point here is that when you're thinking of cost of delay, it may not just be linear. There may be different shapes. There may be stair-step shapes. There may be this graph to where really if you just ignore it, it kind of goes away. There's lots of things that aren't like that, but there are sometimes things that are. Or something like this where it gets worse and worse. Or something like this where it's like everything's fine until it's not and you die. Or projects canceled, go bankrupt. Probably shouldn't use the death example. Okay, so go back to the chat, and which activity has this type of cost of delay? And I may have given these away. And it's not like one of these answers is completely right. I'll give you my opinion on it. The reason I probably wouldn't choose C is because leaving the lights on is probably mostly a linear thing, although you get billed for it at the end of the month, so you could look for it, like if you're thinking about skipping out and just not being there when the bill shows up, but you're accruing the expense even if you don't see it to the end. So if you think of it as when you get the bill, maybe it is stair-stepped. Although if you think of it when you're accruing the expense, then the stair-step may not be the best way to represent it. Unless, I guess, you leave it on all night and then turn it off in the day or something. I don't know. Dealing with termites. So my experience with seeing what termites do, if I delay dealing with termites, like I don't get rid of the termites, I would probably expect that to be fine until you discover, and then the house starts falling apart, and gets worse and worse. So I probably expect that to be more like an exponential curve for cost of delay. The one that strikes me on this one is canceling Netflix, right? Okay. I don't have I'm going along, I don't have to pay anything, get to whenever my renewal date is, and then I pay my whatever it is nowadays for Netflix. Okay, so I've incurred that expense, then you go along, you don't have any expense till you get to the end, and then you incur that expense. So more of a stair step. But there's probably a way to think of it for termites as well, possibly. Okay, which activity has this shape of cost of delay? So this is one where as you're going, as time progresses, if you delay doing this, it becomes worse and worse and worse for you. So folding laundry, many times, I'm not sure there's any cost of delay in not folding laundry. A matter of fact, I'm not even sure it's worth it to match your socks. You're probably better off just throwing your socks away, getting things that match, and doing that. Or even, you know, what's the cost of delay of not sorting your silverware? If you dump it all into the drawer, it's going to take you a little bit more time to grab what you want. But is it really more than it took you to sort it originally? So I'm probably making myself sound really weird, but I used to do a lot of thinking about personal productivity, and so that's in there. So, okay, so folding laundry, I don't see a good way to make it folding laundry. Fixing technical debt is the one I was kind of thinking of, because if you put it off, you eventually get to the point that maybe your application, you can't make any changes to it without everything breaking. And so it makes it slower and slower, more and more expensive to make changes. The mandatory security training, that one is probably very valid as well, right? If you're not doing your training and you just put off learning how to write secure stuff, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse as far as your risk, maybe. Although it may be something where it's a flat line until you have a security incident, and then it's like, you know, shoots up maybe. Canceling Amazon Prime probably isn't going to be exponential. Maybe if you zoom all the way out and look at, you know, the trajectory of their rate increases with inflation and stuff, maybe it would look something like that. But canceling Amazon Prime is probably going to be a little bit more stair-stepped. You pay for it, you're good till the next month. I don't know if they refund money. I'm assuming they don't refund money if you cancel them all. But okay, which activity has this cost of delay? So this is like there's very low cost, you know, you're sailing around low cost, and then there's something happens and it's almost catastrophic. So updating software dependencies, scuba diver resurfacing to refill tank, or balancing a checking account. So updating software dependencies, that could be a good thing. You know, like you don't update them and there's no really expense until you have some type of security incident that takes down your entire company. You know, maybe and the cost goes really high because of that. So that could be a reason for updating software dependencies. The one I was most thinking of is scuba diver resurfacing. If they get to the point that they're almost out of time and they go, oh, I'm just going to delay this. They delay resurfacing. There's no cost until you run out of air, and then, you know, they run out of air and they die. I'm really on the dramatic examples today, I guess. So that would be an example of something that's catastrophic for them, that there's no cost until it costs everything. Balancing the checking account. So, I mean, you could make a case for you don't balance it until you run out of money, and then there's a huge cost related to that because you've written your overdraft. Or maybe it's stair step. Maybe balance checking out is stair step because, you know, every time you get too low, you get an extra fee, and so it's stair step but random. So, and the point here isn't that like these, you know, my point here isn't so you like really think deeply about how scuba divers resurface, but just to get us thinking, so when we're looking at stories, we're thinking about the cost of delay associated with those. Okay, leaving on unnecessary lights. Which of these has a cost of delay like this? Monica Geller may not agree with me on arranging silverware example. I'll have to look up who that is. I imagine she likes her stuff nice and neat. I'm just talking about the cost. You know, how much time does it take me to look at non-sorted silverware and get what I need versus the time it takes to sort it each time. And we do sort our silverware here. I'm just not sure it's good return on our investment. Oh, on Friends. Okay, I'll have to. I may not have seen that episode. I may have to look that one up. Okay, leaving on unnecessary light. So yes, this is probably going to be more linear. Now the C down here, there are places that do charge for that, and the more electricity you use, the higher and higher your rate. Sometimes there's ones that go the other way too. So in some places, yes, it may actually be C. But generally, when we think of something that incurs a fee for every hour it runs, that's probably going to be more linear. But there may be situations. You may live in one of those places where C is actually how you're charged. Okay, fixing security scan findings. So that's linear. Is it the catastrophic or is it exponential? And there's different ways to think about it. The linear growth of the cost of delay could be representing that you've got security scan findings, but maybe you're in an environment where they don't really matter because you're not open to the internet or something like that. In that case, if you think you may need to fix them sometime, the linear growth may actually be true, right? You know, you're taking on this debt that you think you're going to need to fix sometime, but you're not dealing with it now, so it becomes more and more expensive over time to deal with, and it's linear though because nothing catastrophic happens. On the other hand, B, which is kind of the one I tend to think of, is you're fine, no one cares until something really bad happens, and then the cost jumps way up, much higher than it would have been to go ahead and invest in it as you go along. Or the exponential growth is probably valid too. You know, the longer you go, the harder it's going to be to fix. Particularly if we're thinking in terms of the cost of the risk, it probably does look something like that, exponential. So hopefully that's a useful way to kind of think about it. Like I said, it's not like these answers are, some things are right and some things are wrong here. The point is to get us thinking about there are different shapes to the cost of delay. And when we're looking at a story, we need to be thinking of, if I delay doing this, what type of profile does this have? Does it get more and more expensive over time? It still may make sense to delay it, but there may be a point at which we decide not to delay it anymore. So those are useful ways to just be thinking of stories. And if you're having trouble deciding what to work on next or discussing cost of delay, you know, even just charting out, here's the shape of this. If we keep waiting on this, it gets more and more expensive. So we want to make sure we don't wait too long and having those conversations with your team. Okay. So let's look at now another graph here. I've actually found the best way to clean this off is like with one of those things to clean hair out of your on your vacuum. You know, rotating brush, just clean it off with that. Okay, so let's see here. We want to look at, okay, so let's talk about what the cost of delay is. Late entry to the hairbow market. So I've got some friends in town. They run hairbowcenter.com, which sells lots of supplies for hairbows. And to me, at least in my thinking for this example, hairbows are kind of like a fad that they happen to catch the wave of and have a nice business dealing with that right now. So if we look over time, so let's get another graph up here. We've got time this way. And there's value. So let's say that they get, they don't delay. And so they get a graph like this, you know, riding the wave and then it comes back down. Now they'll probably start selling other things and stuff. And I know they've diversified and stuff. So if they were to not get started as soon as they did, maybe they could do a graph something like this, right? So the cost of delay in this particular case might be all this area right here. So they're able to ride a wave of a fad, and maybe it's not a fad, I don't know, we're just using it as fad as an example. Ride the wave, take advantage of that by being first and not delaying, and then ride it back down. Whereas if they were to wait, of waited, they would have kind of missed that peak. And they could still peak like this, but they would have kind of left that on the tables. You know, a competitor might have ended up taking that part of things. So that's one type of graph you could have with thinking of the cost of delay. So let's think of a company like maybe PayPal or something like that. So instant payments. So when it comes to instant payments, there's an advantage of being first to the market, right? If you wait to get to the market, you're going to have competitors, and once everybody's using PayPal, it's really hard to come up and start out Venmo or something like that. Now they did it, but you probably will see a graph that looks something like this. So let's say that you, so maybe say this is PayPal. So they're able to do something like that and capture that type of value. But if they were to wait, they might have only, you know, maybe they could capture something like that. Actually, that's not the graph I meant to show. Let me get this off here. I was looking at my notes and did the wrong thing. So assume that this kind of assumes that the amount of payments that people might want to do is fixed. But by PayPal being first, they were able to capture not just the early adopters here, but then retain a lot of them going on. Whereas if they had waited, somebody else would have had that market dominance position. So the cost of delay for them waiting would have been all this area here that continues on forever, right? Another graph here. So I live in a rural area, and for many years, it was pretty much a monopoly on who you could get internet service from. So internet service providers, particularly in the rural areas, and there's some areas here that there's really not any wired options still, but if you have a monopoly and you can determine whether or not you service people or not, and no one else can move in there, well, then your graph looks a little bit different, right? So like, let's say you're the phone company and you're like, okay, we could provide internet to people and capture all this value right here. But what happens if they wait, right? If they decide, we're not going to provide internet service to these rural areas because we're not worried about anybody else moving in to this area or taking those customers. Well, then if they wait, the graph may look something like this, right? They're still able to capture all the same number of people. There's just this small amount here, just that moment in time. And, you know, that may legitimately be a good business choice for them. It's a pain if you live on a farm, you can't get to the internet. But the point is, this one right here, so this one, we're capturing value by being earlier, but then they both taper off. This one, by being earlier, we continue to capture that value forever into the future. This one right here, we could capture value sooner, but eventually we'll capture the same amount of value later. So these are all just different ways of thinking about the value of waiting on the value you're foregoing by waiting. Now, the thing with all of these is knowing how much value you're foregoing by waiting, or having some idea of what it might look like for that particular story, is important. But the really interesting thing is, what could you do other than doing this? So for the internet service provider, is there something else they're investing in that's way, way more valuable than this, and they're choosing to do that instead of this? Well, then as the farmer, I may not be happy with it, but as a stockholder, maybe that's exactly what I want him to do. Over here, if you've got something, if there's something new coming out and you don't get at the beginning of it, you may miss a lot just forever. You may never be able to capture that because somebody else has that dominant position. So hopefully that's helpful. You can delay a uniqueness matters more than being good. Okay. So hang on, let me check I see there may have been a few things here. So if you're not in a very high competitive market, the cost of delay is less important, right? Yes, and I know I've got a lot of people I work with that are working in government systems and things like that where there's not really competition. So this is we're thinking of this more in terms of how things look from a standpoint of being in a market and in a free market. But I think there is it does apply in different ways, right? There are some things that you're still going to have, even if you're not actually participating in the market, that if you, like with this, the value, if you wait long enough, it's not valuable at all and you'd never want to do it anyway, and it doesn't have continual value. There may be other things that are easy, like, well, we can delay this and it doesn't really hurt us. You know, we capture this value, but it doesn't really hurt us to go ahead and delay doing this. There's value that would be captured here, but we can get back to that anytime. So maybe we want to prioritize instead something like this, that if we're not able to go ahead and get this thing out there, maybe the cost of that exists forever in the system. So maybe, like, I think one example I could think of with this is if you start by writing tests for your application when you start doing the development work, you're going to be able to capture the maximum value of having tests in your application. If you wait, you will probably never capture that same amount of value that you could have if you had started at the beginning. So the point is, it applies to things that may not be just directly things in the market. Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I've got a question for you here, and this will come up next week too, but there is an expensive shared resource that each team needs for only 30 minutes per day. Yeah, okay. Expensive shared resource. Each team needs it for only 30 minutes per day. How many teams can be reasonably handled by each instance of this resource? Okay, so each team needs it for 30 minutes per day. So assume an 8-hour day. How many teams can one of these resources service? So 16 would be, we take 8 hours a day and divide by 30 minutes. That means there are 16 30-minute chunks per day. Maybe if the resource is a person, maybe you give them a half an hour for lunch or an hour for lunch. So maybe it's somewhere in the range of 16. That would make sense. 8 kind of says, okay, it's 30 minutes each, but maybe we want a little bit of slack built into it. And 1 is saying that each of those teams needs their own resource available at all times. So what I want, so these are all valid responses, right? There are some things where you only want 1. There are some things where you actually could do 16. But okay, so we've got this idea. But now let me ask you, think about a resource in your house that everyone uses for 30 minutes a day. And let's say you're awake at home for 8 hours. Everyone in your family needs it for 30 minutes a day. Would you be okay with only one of these resources for every 8 family members, or even every 16 members? Like if you have 16 people in your house, how would you be with having only 1 bathroom? And the point of this is that there is a cost of delay related to it not being available when you're ready for it, or when you need the resource. We lived in New York for a little while with our family of 4 in a 1-bedroom small apartment, and this actually becomes a constraint, right? There's more people than just the fact that you only need it for 30 minutes a day. Sometimes people need it at the same time. And I think on average, I looked up some stuff, said people spend 30 minutes in the bathroom a day. So clearly a dorm of 48 people only needs a single toilet, right? Because you can fit that all. Anyway, so the cost of delay in capacity planning. Because that's what we're talking about here, right? We've got a resource. There's a cost of delay associated with when you want to use that resource. And our intuition of just dividing it up to figure out how we can keep it busy will lead us into not necessarily optimizing for the real cost of delay. So, okay, so another example here. Let's say that, the chances of your house catching on fire, best statistics I could find, is 2.7 out of 1,000. And I think that's per year. So it's pretty low. A pretty good chance your house isn't going to catch on fire. So if we were to staff our fire department to make sure that that they were fully busy at putting out fires, that would mean that we would need to make sure that there were enough fires every day, a big enough town that there were enough fires every day to keep somebody busy. That's not what the value of a fire department is. Not that they are kept busy. The value of a fire department is that they can get there very quickly to put out your fire, because the cost of waiting to put out your fire is very, very high. And your resource planning has to align with that idea that their value is to be able to do things quickly and to stop the fire. Not their value is to be really, really busy and have efficiency numbers of just, we kept them busy all the time. Most of the time, if you go by a firehouse, you'll find that they're not out there putting out fires. Most of the time they're working. And that's a good thing, because what you really want them to do is be available to put out a fire the moment there is a fire to be put out. So let's say Bob deploys your code to QA in production. It takes 1 hour and you deploy on average once a week. Therefore, you only need one person in Bob's position for every 40 projects. Well, that's only true if you're saying that keeping Bob busy is the best measure of how he provides value. It may be that getting that code actually deployed and into production QA and into production is actually more valuable and worth more than Bob's efficiency numbers of him being booked every single minute of the day. And we can, let's see here, we can kind of see this. So if we think in terms of, let's see, got a space here. Okay. So if we think in terms of the cost, so here we've got our cost again. Just put dollar signs there. And here we've got excess. So excess capacity. Okay. Okay. So we've got extra. Here's how much it costs. Here's how much extra people, people sitting around, they don't have anything to do for some reason, or they can't do what it is that we hired them to do. So when we have very little excess capacity, actually let me do this other graph first. So the cost of excess capacity is going to look something like this, right? So if we have no excess capacity, we're not paying for anyone to sit around, right? So it gets more expensive. The more people we have that we don't need, the longer it's going to take. But on the other hand, the cost of delay, if we have no excess capacity and everything has to be scheduled out, then you're going to end up with a curve like this. That's the cost of delay. So there's the cost of delay. I don't know what to call that, so I won't label it. So if we just look at the cost of delay, we'd want to be way over here, right? But this should constrain us. If we just look at excess capacity, we'd want to be way over here. But this should be constraining us. What we need to do is take a more holistic approach and make sure we're considering both of these things. And so the actual sweet spot is probably somewhere, in this range, because that's where we're actually looking at things holistically. And we'll talk more about this next week when we talk about dealing with shared resources. So let's go. Okay, what time is it? Okay, we've got 5 minutes. We've got a cost of delay quiz here. There's no prizes this week, but if anybody wants to just make sure you remember these things, we'll go through this. Let me paste this in here one more time for you. Okay, so what situation is best represented by this cost of delay pattern? So for this pattern, what's best represented? Is it delay in learning new technologies, delay in turning off a stove burner when you smell it is leaking gas, delay in taking vitamins, or delay in learning how to read and write? And like I said, there's lots of different ways to answer that. This is just my opinion at the time I created the poll. So you've got 19 people. Does anyone else want to get their opinion in there? And even if you're not participating, I've got a feedback form at the end, so please do leave it up because I would like to get your feedback. Okay, and yes, delay in turning off a stove burner when you smell it's leaking gas. There's no real pain from it until your house blows up and the walls blow out. There was a house where my dad grew up that had this happen to it, so you want to avoid that. Okay, and you could make a case probably for some of those other ones too. That's just the one that I thought happened to seem best for me. Okay, so there we got our leaderboard. Moving on. Which two things operate in tension to impact the total cost? Which two things operate in tension to impact the total cost? Credit card processing versus purchase order, fire trucks versus firefighters, internal versus external, or cost of delay versus cost of excess capacity? Capacity. Okay. Okay. 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. And yes, cost of delay versus excess capacity. Like the graph we saw here, cost of delay, we want to be low, but excess capacity, if it's too high, then that's inefficient. We want to balance those two things. Those two things are held in tension. Okay, very good. Oh, it looks like we may end up with one winner. Last time we did this, we ended up with lots of winners. Okay, a story with high what may be split into multiple stories with blank cost of delay. With high blank may be split into multiple stories with blank cost of delay. So high entropy may be split into multiple stories with internal cost of delay. With high cost of delay may be split into multiple stories with different cost of delay. Or with high distractions may be split into multiple stories with tremendous cost of delay. Or with high cohesion may be split into multiple stories with inherent cost of delays. And yes, I was just looking up words when I put that together. Yes, cost of delay and difference. So high cost of delay may be split up into multiple stories with different cost of delays. And if the cost of delays are different, then you can prioritize them differently, if the stories allow you to break them up like that. Okay, ANS pulls into the lead. All right. What is the cost of delay for billing functionality on a newly launched product with a 90-day free trial? We've got a newly launched product with a 90-day free trial. What is the cost of delay for billing functionality? Is it 0 cost of delay at 89 days? Is it 150 at 15, 450 at 75, or 15 cost of delay per user per week? 3 seconds remaining. 3, 2, 1. And yes, 0 cost of delay at 89 days, because until you hit 89 days, everyone's still on the free trial, no matter how many users you have signed up. And now at 90 days, it starts changing. ANS is in the lead, followed by Elise, Guess, Jen, Liza, Michael, Annie, JB, Bill, and TRB. What cost of delay might this represent? Delay fixing technical debt, waiting to replace your furnace filter, delay checking your bungee bindings, like if you're going bungee jumping, or delay canceling your cable services you don't use. 3 seconds left. 3, 2, 1. Very good. Yes, delay canceling your cable services you don't use, or at least the way I'm thinking of it. There may be a way to justify some of these others too, but generally cable services, you have the fee every month. Okay, there's the leaderboard. Oh, we've got guest 139 in top place now. Which statement would Mark consider correct? I shared this lunch and learn invite with my coworkers, or I'm keeping these lunch and learns a secret from my coworkers. Got 3 seconds left. 1, 2, 3. And yes, no, I don't want you to. We got 4% people think that they should keep these. Mark wants you to keep these lunch and learns a secret from your coworkers. No, I would like you to share these with your coworkers. So the one coming up on shared resources, love for you to share that with people if you know of anybody that's interested in it. Our leaderboard here, we've got guest 139 took the top spot. I wasn't going to give away anything this time because usually we have multiple winners on these. This was pretty close, but guest 139, if you want to take a screenshot and send it to me, I will get a book. I'd love to send you a copy of my Starting Agile book or my book on productivity. Your choice, whichever one you think is more useful. I'll get that in the mail to you. Just a reminder, there's the book, there's the URL, and please fill out the presentation feedback form. I'd like to hear what you thought, what was useful, what wasn't. This is a little bit different setup and more free-flowing, so I'd love to see what people think and how I could make this better. So next time I do this, we can I can improve. This is my mini retrospective here. Okay, so please fill that out. I do have just a minute. If anyone has any questions that I can help with, please feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute, and I'd love to talk for you. I've got just a few minutes here.
Mark. Osaro
Hello.
here.
How are you doing?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark. I got the book, The Lean Startup by Eric Rice, and it's a beautiful companion. So it's really exposing and teaching me a lot of ways to start my organization,
Cool.
implementing the Lean Startup.
Great. I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear you're finding it useful.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your support.
Cool. That's great. Great.
Yeah. And Mark, are you going to share the deck for this presentation?
I don't know the deck's going to be very interesting, but I'm going to try to get the video out to you. I did record this one.
Okay.
So I should probably
Cool.
stop it.
The video will be very, very good for me.
Okay. Yes, I'll try to get that out to you here in the next, maybe later today or tomorrow.